So I saw a cover for a book and I thought, this guy's name is James Smith. My name is James Smith. He's written a book called How to Be Confident. I've written about becoming more confident. So I thought, let's talk about this book. So confidence is a theme that I've been exploring in many of the things that I've been doing on my YouTube channel and in my book, The Shy Guy's Guide to Traveling. And this guy, James Smith, this imposter, decides to come along and do the same thing. So let's have a look at what he's written. Now, I had no exposure to any of James Smith's content before reading this book. And apparently he is a personal trainer by trade and he's very popular on social media. This is not my area of expertise, so I will leave that for other people to comment on. This is just a review, so to speak, of this book. Now, the problem with reviews of non-fiction books is it's entirely contingent on what you've already read, because if it's about a subject you have no exposure to whatsoever, it will probably have a higher place in your mind than a book that is equally well written, but it already covers a lot of grounds that you're already familiar with. Now with this does cover a lot of grounds that I think many people will be familiar with if you've set foot in a W.H. Smith or Barnes & Noble in the past 5 years. One of these days I'm going to play a drinking game with one of these non-fiction books. Drink whenever somebody mentions the sunk cost fallacy, social desirability bias, survivorship bias, the Stanford prison experiments, any quote by Nelson Mandela, Gandhi, or Abraham Lincoln, or any anecdote from the life of Bill Gates or Steve Jobs. What this book is, it certainly isn't a thorough exploration, a treatise on the subject of confidence. Neither is it a list of tips and tricks about how to become more confident. It's more of a sort of personal exploration through James Smith's own experiences with this idea or problem of confidence, intertwined with his readings on the topic as well. And sometimes it can flip from one idea to the next, and sometimes it's difficult to keep track on what point he's actually trying to make. That is my main criticism of this book. That said, the things that are good are very good and jibe very nicely with my experience with this issue of confidence and social anxiety. Particularly, which was a surprise to me, about travel. What he says about travel is such like what I've written about that it's freaky. And I'll get to that in a second. One really good point, which I mentioned in my previous video, the low cost of failure in the modern world in comparison to your fear about it. Now, the reason why we do have social anxiety is because we've evolved to adapt to an environment in which if we messed up our social interactions, it could have been very serious, even life-threatening. But these days, in this globalist, multifaceted world, the costs of making a slight error in your social interactions are tiny, if at all. But we have this disproportionate response, and he agrees with me on that. One thing that was new to me was something called the Zeigarnik effect. Let me try and explain that. Okay, so this comes from the observation that people can actively remember something better if it's an open loop, like it's still on dial. For example, a waiter can remember better the order that they're currently solving than an order that's closed and they've already got the bill. Because the one that had finished is a closed loop in the waiter's mind. It's done and dusted. It can be put under the rug. Whereas the open loop is already there and it's actively in the front of his mind. Now, how does that relate to confidence? Well, James Smith said, any situation in which you have been prevented from doing something that you wanted to do because of your social fear, your lack of confidence, is an open loop in your mind. It sticks around. Another thing about the Zeigarnik effect is that the open loops create tension because it's unresolved. And that's important for a waiter because they should always know that they still have things to do with that particular table. But in our daily lives, for example, you see a job opportunity that you'd really like to do, but you decide against pursuing it because of fear. That will be nagging on your mind. Now think of the pretty girl that you see on the street. You'll be thinking about that girl in 6 weeks' time if you don't go and talk to her. That's just the way it is. If you close these loops, you will feel so much better. You'll feel free. You'll feel at rest, at peace. Another thing I really agree with James Smith on is that confidence, or the lack of it, is not an inherent part of your character. There is no known personality test, for instance, that can properly control for confidence, and it doesn't seem like it's genetic, really. In any case, it is something that you can work on, it's something that you can improve, which is good news. You're not destined to be a person with social anxiety or, generally speaking, a lack of confidence. And if you are in favor of a growth mindset, then confidence is one thing that's really going to open up avenues for you if you decide to improve it. And now to the juicy stuff. The stuff that really made me excited, because he talks about traveling, which is a surprise to me. And what do you know? He almost has exactly the same anecdote that I do about improving your confidence when you go traveling. And let me bring it up to you now. I'm experienced in traveling, and going solo is by far my favorite method. You're almost pressurized to speak to people, to make friends, and to go up to a group of people and ask, "Hey, can I join you guys? I'm traveling here on my own." Every time, people smiled and said yes. Of course, in my head, I thought every time they would be hostile and unwilling of my company. But when you travel solo, like I think a lot of people do, you share this sense of joined vulnerability that makes the bonding between travelers even tighter. Like the wolves, the numbers are always greater until they are counted. You can bet that the majority of your fears of traveling solo are much bigger and greater in your mind than they ever are in reality. Absolutely spot on, and I talked about in my previous video about how the fact that in the end I got so confident going up to people in hostels that it became almost rude. Not really, but almost rude. In that it would be like, "Hey, who are you? What are you doing today?" And people would respond to that for the most part. And that's your friend for the day at least. And even if they don't become your best friend for life, nonetheless, it is a laboratory in which you are free to be yourself and to improve your confidence. Because even if you muck up that interaction, there's always tomorrow, because another person's going to be joining the hostel, or you're going to go on to the next one. I was so shocked / surprised, pleasantly surprised to see that James Smith agrees with James Smith on this one. And finally, another quote from his bit about traveling. If you're someone who's considering sacking it all off and traveling the world a bit, it's not a decision really, is it? Because your mind is already made up. Let's not beat around the bush here. If you're thinking about it most days, the reality is you're fully decided. You're just behind a firewall of fear. You're waiting for someone, for me perhaps, to make it less scary for you. You're wanting it to be less scary instead of finding the courage you should be seeking to just do it, just go. For so many of the scariest decisions in life, it's about jumping in and correcting the course along the route. Yes, I absolutely agree. And this is another example of a piece in this book which you can get a tidbit of really helpful stuff, even if it's not really thorough. It's not like the book about confidence, which you would expect to be 900 pages and do a thorough takedown of the subject. This is just a kind of exploration of the topic, and that this is where you get the value in those little tidbits. Just go. Just get on a plane. What I mean by that is go. What I don't mean is plan endlessly until it's going to be absolutely perfect. I don't necessarily mean have no plan whatsoever, but assume that you're going, book the trip, and then work around it. Waiting until it's going to be the perfect circumstance for you to go travel the world, you'll be waiting a very long time. So that's that. That's James Smith's How to Be Confident, reviewed by James Smith. And if you want to read this James Smith's book, it's on Amazon. You can just search Shy Guy Travel. The title of the book is The Shy Guy's Guide to Traveling, Overcome Your Fears and See the World. It talks about some of the obstacles that people might have that apparently prevent them from going traveling and how to overcome some of those obstacles. But it also explains why you want to go. One of the reasons is that your confidence, your self-confidence will absolutely skyrocket. Links in the description. And if you can't access Amazon because you're in China, for example, send me a message on Instagram. Okay, so that's that. I guess great names think alike. Bye.